the city of Bethlehem, where Ruth had lived, Jesse made his home. Jesse was the grandson of Ruth, and he had many sons. One day Samuel came to Bethlehem in search of a new king. Samuel came to the house of Jesse because God told him that the king would be there. Jesse brought 6 of his sons to Samuel, but the new king was not among them. Samuel asked, "Are there any more sons?" Jesse said, "Yes, there is David, the youngest, who is keeping the sheep." When Samuel saw him, he knew at once that David was the king he was looking for.
I wonder how he knew he had found the king.
He took his horn full of oil, like the oil in this container, and poured it over David's head to make him the new king. This was very confusing because there was already a king in the land, King Saul. But Saul had changed. An evil spirit tormented him. Still, David would not begin to rule until Saul died.
I wonder why he got chosen so far in advance. I mean, he would have to wait a long time.
He was the chosen one of Israel.
Saul's sickness became worse. Someone suggested he needed music to feel better. So David the shepherd boy was brought to play the harp and sing songs to soothe the king.
Good move. Music is therapy. King Saul seemed like a troubled soul.
Some of David's songs can be found in a book of the Psalms. While David was still a young boy, there was a great war in the land. The Philistines wanted the land for themselves. The army of the people of God and the army of the Philistines were lined up ready to fight. A very tall man, like a giant, came out to challenge Saul's army. His name was Goliath. No one wanted to fight him. When David heard the challenge, he went forward to fight Goliath. They tried to put the armor of the king on him, but it was too heavy. David cast it aside and went against Goliath with only 5 smooth stones, his slingshot and his shepherd's staff. He had killed bears and lions to defend the sheep. Why couldn't he kill Goliath to defend the people? And he did.
Makes sense.
The people never forgot David's bravery, and when he grew up, he became a soldier in the army of the king. King Saul had many sons. One of them was named Jonathan. David and Jonathan became close friends. Jonathan always stood up for David and tried to protect him from harm, even from his father, the king.
What a sweet friendship.
The king was very jealous of David. David was a great soldier, and over time, he grew more popular than the king himself. This made the king so angry that he wanted to kill David. Jonathan spoke to his father about David and told him that David was a good man, but Saul would not listen. Jonathan knew that the only way for David to be safe would be for him to run away and hide from King Saul. This meant that the 2 good friends had to say goodbye.
That must have been a hard time for Jonathan and David.
King Saul and his sons led the army against the Philistines once more, but this time Saul and Jonathan were killed.
Jonathan!
Oh no!
David was moving through the land with his army, and a young man came to him with the news that King Saul and his sons were dead. When David heard the news, he was very sad. David never forgot his good friend Jonathan, and later when he was king, he brought Jonathan's own son to live with him, to eat at his table, and gave him the land that had belonged to King Saul.
King David was loyal.
It was time for David to be king. The young man brought to David the king's crown. All the tribes of Israel came to Hebron and made him king, saying, "You shall be shepherd over the people." At the time, he was 30 years old, and he would be king for 40 more years. One of the first things David did was to go to the city of Jerusalem and take it from the Jebusite people. So now there was a city of David in Bethlehem and a second in Jerusalem.
Mighty warrior!
Then David remembered that the ark had been lost to the Philistines. He led his army against the Philistines and defeated them. They went to get the ark and brought it into Jerusalem. The king danced in front of the ark as it was carried to its place in the tent, like it had been in the desert. David wanted to build a house for God, a more beautiful place for the ark.
What a beautiful relationship King David had with God.
But God said no. David was king of war. His son Solomon would build a temple. In the spring of the year, the time when kings go forth to war, David sent his army, but he remained in Jerusalem. One afternoon, he saw Bathsheba, the beautiful wife of Uriah the Hittite. He wanted her for himself, and so he sent Uriah the Hittite into battle where he was killed. Then King David married Bathsheba.
Oh no, that's a very, very poor choice.
I wonder what happens next.
One day, the Lord sent Nathan the prophet to David. Nathan told King David a parable. A rich man and a poor man lived in the same town. The rich man had many sheep. The poor man had only one little lamb that he raised as a pet in his house. He even let it eat from his plate and drink from his cup. It slept on his lap. The lamb was like one of his own children. One day, someone came to visit the rich man. The rich man didn't want to kill any of his own sheep to serve to the visitor. So he took the poor man's lamb and served it instead.
Sound familiar?
David was furious at the rich man in the story. As the Lord lives, the man who did deserve to die. He must pay for the lamb 4 times over because he did this thing and has no pity. Then Nathan said to David, "You are that rich man. God has given you everything, and yet you took for yourself." David was filled with sorrow. He wondered if he would die like King Saul. David did not die, but the first son he had with Bathsheba did not live. David and Bathsheba were both filled with sorrow, but the next child they had lived. They named him Solomon. He would become the next king and would build a house for God. King David was not a perfect king. He made many mistakes, but he understood that and asked God to forgive him. And God did.
Forgiveness, a central teaching of our faith.
When David was old and full of years, he died and was buried in Jerusalem. His son Solomon continued to rule over his kingdom and build the temple. And now, I encourage you to express this story with art materials of your choice. I can't wait to see what you create.